And in the concluding part of our conversation, let me do maybe somewhat unusual thing, because instead of asking you a question, I would rather ask you to ask yourself a question which maybe you would like to answer, but I haven't asked you. So please, Professor McCormick.
Where did you learn to turn the tables on your philosophical friends? It sounds as if a professor of philosophy knows very well how to deploy these critical and self-critical skills. So you've turned me back on myself and have asked me to criticize myself in a way. Well, let me say this much. When I ask myself, what does my situation call me to do? What does my situation today summon me to be? What ought I to do? Who am I to be in times like these? I quickly begin to realize that these questions are a little bit too self-centered. The question is not so much what ought I to do? As I said in the conference, who ought I to be? The question is, what ought we to do? Because I am no longer a solitary individual. So much of who I am is in your hands. It's in the hands of my friends. It's in the hands of my family. It's in the hands of my civic community. And so much of who I want to be is also who we want to be. Our community, our civic society, our country, the place where we are. So the question for me then, one central question for me now is, how ought I to live with you? How am I to live with others on the basis of such values that they themselves might be able to accept? I must somehow or other continue my conversations with you in such a way that you will come to see not only that we share certain values, but you may also come to see that there are certain reasons for the values you hold which I have not yet seen and not yet embraced, and which you can give me good arguments for. And conversely, we might continue our conversations in the hope that I might have certain convictions which you do not yet share, reasoned convictions, argued convictions, which I might bring you to see. So I suppose in times like these, at the end of the bloodiest of centuries in all human history, at the beginning of what I call the poorest of centuries, perhaps, poor in not just material ways, in intellectual ways, in communal ways, in spiritual ways, we are poor. We have never been so poor. In this transition period, perhaps the question is, how ought we to live together in such a way that we become more deeply aware of what we can agree on as something we ought to do, on what we can agree on as something, as who we should be. How can we together promote the sovereign good, not only with one another, but with the others who do not share so many of our convictions, but who are our fellow citizens, who are members of our civic community? This is pretty much the beginning, again, of another conversation between us. But in a sincere way, I'm trying to at least respond to this difficult situation you've put me into, where you have, as I said at the beginning, turned the tables on me in the way that any good philosopher ought to be able to do on a regular basis.